Space Marine is a game where you turn so many orcs into mincemeat that you might as well quit your day job as a servant of the Emperor to become McCragg's best butcher. The game follows Ultramarines Captain Titus Mead II, just Titus is fine here, as he slices and dices his way through a Xeno incursion on Imperial Forge World Graia, and there's not an orc, Chaos Marine, or poorly designed boss fight that can stop him. It came out in 2011 at the tail end of the 7th console generation, releasing on PC, Xbox 360 and PS3. And in hindsight, it's become one of the better Warhammer 40k games to release since Games Workshop got their grimy little mitts on the industry. Space Marine wasn't a revolutionary title for its genre by any means, but it earned a good deal of praise at the time, enough for a sequel to be released over a decade later in 2023. Though it likely would have happened a lot earlier if THQ hadn't been banished to the Shadow Realm in 2013. What's intriguing about Space Marine is that it was developed by Relic Entertainment, a studio familiar with 40k but unfamiliar with making games outside of the strategy genre. Well, good ones anyway. The game shipped with a campaign, a co-op horde mode, as well as a frankly unnecessary competitive multiplayer component, which was a very in thing for the 7th console generation. And being a Relic game, it of course featured control points as its core mechanic. Anyway, that's not important, as the only way you'll be playing multiplayer nowadays is if you can convince half a dozen friends to play with you, or rope people in on your Discord. But for the campaign, all you need is yourself, the will of the Emperor, and a burning hatred of Xenos to delve into the action. Space Marine has two sides to its gameplay, the first being an intense melee-focused gore fest, and the second a simple shooty bang bang one where you hold left mouse until something dies. Playing as Captain Titus, you'll cycle through a full arsenal of Space Marine equipment as you blast and saw your way through unending waves of orcs, daemons, and chaos troopers across a 10-hour or so campaign. Spread throughout 17 missions, you'll find a decent variety of scenarios and combat encounters that can really put the screws to you if you're not careful. At times, it's the ultimate Space Marine power fantasy, and at others, it's proof that at the end of the day, under all that armor and gusto, you're just a squishy little human. The game gives you 4 permanent weapon slots that all hold different classes of gun. That's your sidearm, a bolter, and 2 heavies like a bolt sniper or a launcher. But alongside that, there's also space for a melee weapon that's always accessible by hitting the right mouse button. That gives you a good idea on how focused Space Marine is on its melee, with aim down sights being relegated to left control on your keyboard. And despite what most would likely expect from a 7th generation third-person action game, the melee combat is surprisingly deep in a lot of ways, and it easily rivals your ranged weapons in terms of efficacy. Whether you're using the chainsword, the power axe, or the warhammer, each differ in terms of their stats, and they all have combos that you can initiate based on how far through an attack you are. Though what these are isn't exactly obvious unless you dig around in the controls. The way each weapon handles is proportional to the size of it. The big ones hit harder, but they're slower, and the small ones are the opposite. Plus, they all have an extra move at the end of their combo chain, like a ranged swipe from the chainsword. It's incredibly satisfying to tear through hordes of enemies with any weapon, and you feel appropriately godlike dispatching them in outbursts of blood and guts. There's so much gore in this game. This is probably the goriest non-gore game, if that makes sense. Like, blood just goes everywhere, but there's so much blood you just can't see what's happening. It's kind of great. And man, when you pull off a perfectly timed execution, which is possible when you see these symbols above an enemy's head, oh, it's just perfect. You send them flying. And this is important too because it functions as one of the few ways you can restore health at all in this game, meaning unlike other games where low health means cowering behind cover like a little bitch, here it just means you've got to get back into the fight, It feels like a prototype of Doom Eternal's push-forward combat, where you need to constantly bring the fight to the enemy to gain resources, or you're dead. Melee combat is so visceral and so enjoyable that I often forgot I had a gun at all. It would only be until an enemy was perched up out of range of my power axe that I'd be forced to remember. And that's not to say that the ranged combat is bad or not enjoyable, it just feels more generic and less dynamic than its melee counterpart. The weapons perform basically how you'd expect. There's nothing that will really surprise you about how they work. The sniper's a sniper, the shotgun's a shotgun, you've seen these in games before. And there's no secondary fire modes or upgrades that alter how they operate. The most you'll get is a charge and hold option for the plasma weapons, and the need to vent them when they overheat, Mass Effect 1 style. Enemy encounters aren't all that different throughout the campaign, but there are some standout moments. Assault pack levels are flippin' awesome, making you feel basically unstoppable for a few specific sections of the game. It's quite the power trip, I really wish I never had to get rid of them, but the game balance would be totally broken if that was the case. Unfortunately, there are a few issues with combat though, like how with the segments that force ranged engagements, man, they can be really annoying. Since there's no way to reliably heal outside of executions, when that option is taken away, you're reduced to shrinking behind cover as you pick off enemies and wait for your shield to recharge. Not very Space Marine of you. You can gain some health back by activating your available every so often ultimate ability that slows time when aiming down sights and powers up your melee, but it's not usually enough to get you out of a sticky situation, and there were a few portions of the game where I had to constantly restart just dying over and over again because I couldn't regen my health or find enough cover. Also, I really wish you couldn't get shot while in the middle of an execution animation. That's just cheap, man. Combat is also hamstrung by the lack of any meaningful upgrades or customization. There are a handful of specific improvements to pick up as you find them, but they're just that, improvements. Straight upgrades to abilities or skills that you already have. Some sort of branching path that let you focus in on a certain playstyle would be welcome here. And I do hope it's something we see in the sequel. Also, weapon attachments would be pretty cool as well. Mission design is about what you'd expect from a game of this era, with confined levels, fake skyboxes, and literal trench warfare, making the world feel about as claustrophobic as a bedroom cupboard in the 1950s after your dad got home. But they serve their purpose as arenas to dispatch enemies. You don't need to think about them all that much. That is, unless you got stuck in the ground like I did here, then, well, you'll need to think about them quite a lot. Now, I want to talk about the game's few boss fights, but to do that, I need to give you some context to the wider story here. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's no frills, especially in the first half, and, you know, to be honest, I kinda like it that way. In another comparison to modern Doom games, the start of the game doesn't see you dilly-dallying around, learning how to put on your power armor and pick up your bolter. Instead, you just frickin' get in there. Boom, you're airdropping onto orc targets like it's Medal of Honor Airborne. It's fantastic. But it's not all action either. Space Marine does take its time at points, and it's happy to let you just soak in the environment in between set pieces, or listen to the few audio tapes you find. It's actually quite nice. They're quite welcome moments when everything else is just intense action. So the reason you're here is to quell an orc infestation of an Imperial manufacturing world, and the Imperial Guard are deep in battle already with the Greenskins as you arrive. So it's up to you and your Ultramarines brethren to stop the tide and save the planet. Oh, and later in the game, the Blood Ravens make a surprise appearance to lend a hand, which was one of the standout moments for me. I'm really glad Relic leveraged their history with Dawn of War to bring the crossover that we all desperately needed. But things aren't as they seem here, as around halfway through you're encountering Chaos Space Marines and Demon Spawn, led by their big dog Nemeroth, with the Orcs being relegated to more of a side nuisance than a primary threat. They still need to be put down though, so around 2/3 of the game you finally fight Warboss Grimskull, after he's been taunting you up pretty much the whole game. And out of the 2.5 boss fights that are in this game, this one is easily the best. But that doesn't mean it's good. I actually think it's pretty bad. It just doesn't suit the mechanics well, and it just gets more and more irritating as you play it. You kinda just have to hope he doesn't crush you with his charge attack when you execute his little minions, and then you just fill him with holes as he jumps out of the arena. And that's really it. It's not very enticing. But man, the second one is worse. So imagine this, you're 12 hours deep into the campaign and you're in the final stages, and you're finally face to face with Nemeroth, this ugly fucker who's the big bad and he's been orchestrating this whole thing. But instead of a nuanced and unique fight where you get to fight him face to face and beat the fucking crap out of them, he just sits up on his tower and he throws waves of enemies at you until you engage in this weird quick time event to kill him. It's really bizarre. I was kind of shocked by it. And it's not like these two fights take away from the rest of the game, which is still great, but they certainly don't stick with me, and there won't be past making this video. Worst boss fights ever? Not quite. Pretty bad? Absolutely. It hurts the story because it reduces their personalities as badass, powerful warriors when they're utilized in boring, uninspired fights like this. After I defeated Nemeroth, I kind of just sat there. I was in a bit of a haze. I didn't know what had just happened. I couldn't believe how underwhelming it was. But anyway, props to the final scene. It actually caught me off guard and it left me excited for what's coming next. Having Titus be turned over by his own codex simping underling was unexpected, even though he was a bit of a dweeb the whole game, and I love the experience he shares as he's hauled away by the Inquisitor.
Codex Astartes leaves no room for doubt. You cannot touch the warp and emerge unscathed.
The Codex Astartes is a set of rules. They guide us, shape us as Ultramarines, teach us to hold duty and honor sacred above all. But how we live with those rules is the true test of a Space Marine. And you have failed.
Incredibly based, Captain Titus. Based indeed. Here's hoping we get to see the ramifications of this event in the sequel. Like any game this old, there are a few considerations you'll want to make before playing it in 2023. Luckily, none are all that difficult nor serious in this case. The first is that if you're planning on playing multiplayer, then you need to bring some friends, as you rightly guess that there's no bustling online community for this game. Hi, so Editor Zade here. I just wanted to add a couple of notes here about Space Marine multiplayer and co-op, because I'd only played by myself when writing the first edition of the script, and I've just played an hour with some lads from the Discord, much appreciated. Yeah, so we played co-op, and it was actually pretty fun, though extremely hard. We were really shocked about how difficult it was, and we weren't sure if it maybe didn't scale very well. We had 2 and then 3 people, but it was pretty fun. Very difficult again. There's not much else to say. It's fun for a while. But then we played multiplayer and we actually found 3 other people to play against. So we played PvP, 3v3, and surprisingly, it was pretty cool. And they were like true Space Marine gamers. So they were, max level, had all the equipment, and we were all pretty low level. But it was pretty fun, and we got some kills, and we flew around as Space Marines, and I could see this being enjoyable when it had, if there was a big player base. It was exciting. There were some unique things. The time to kill was actually really slow, so it wasn't like your normal multiplayer shooter. There was setup time. You had to kind of play somewhat smartly. There's some advanced movement with the Havoc Troopers. There's some unique weapons. The melee is cool. Yeah, overall, it was actually pretty fun. So if you do want to give it a try, then you should do so. Alright, that's all. Back to the video. The same goes for the horde-based co-op mode, though admittedly you can play that one solo. And if you're looking for some brainless co-op slaughtering action with your mates, then there are definitely worse options than this. That is if you can buy the game on sale, as its base price on Steam is a gnarly $80 US. Yeesh. Classic Sega, am I right? And yeah, I can see your comments. It goes on sale in the Skulls event. Alright, just leave them, that's fine. But otherwise, thankfully running this game is a breeze, with it being the age it is. So even you Timmy out there with the potatoest of PCs, you shouldn't find any trouble. The last thing to consider is that there's a sequel on the way, this year even, hopefully, bar any delays. Creatively named Space Marine 2, it's a sort of direct sequel to the first game, as it again follows Captain Titus in his unending fight against enemies of the Imperium. However, I don't think it's a sequel in the sense that you need to have played the first game to understand it, since it's set 100 or 200 years in the future, indicated by the service studs in Titus's forehead here. Oh, and that he's now a Primaris Marine. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you're interested in the sequel, then you probably don't have to play the original to be on board, but it will certainly give you some context, and hey, the original's a goddamn blast anyway, so why wouldn't you? Space Marine is just waiting for you to come back to it. It's primed and it's ready to go. It's strangely refreshing playing a game like this today. Focused, primarily single-player action games like this aren't nearly as common nowadays, thanks to modern gaming's requirements of live service money machines being the only viable product big publishers will greenlight anymore. Like RTS, indie and AA devs are holding the fort now in this space, and I hope Space Marine 2 follows in its predecessor's footsteps of being a no-nonsense bloodbath full of action and excitement. So yes, you should definitely play Space Marine in 2023. Speaking of no-nonsense action bloodbaths, I should really play Bulletstorm again. Thanks to my patrons for making this video possible. You keep the lights on in here and I can't thank you enough. That's Aero, Crizzy218, George Rain, Jack Walsh, Nutty Jawa, Overlord Jeebus, T-Edits, Crispy Robo Chicken, XV204, Benjamin Howard, who's new, thank you, Dakayo, David DeBoli, Wintendo, Bad Ghosts, Sean Webber, and Jody Woof, who supports me at the Paladin tier. Thanks a lot, mate. You know I appreciate it. If you're a member, you can become part of the Discord. We just wrapped up a couple of games of Rise of Nations, which was super fun. So if you're a member, then you can join through Patreon or YouTube memberships. And if you have any issues, just DM me on Twitter or on either of those platforms. And otherwise, thank you everyone very much for watching. And I will see you all next time.